my favourite proverb, I think, ever in the entire world is Tora putalasa ekine yorte lenechme kutalia, which is, of course, Greek for now the sea has become yogurt. We have no spoons.
The name of the game today is going to be on best practice for teaching online. And I think, we're going to focus a little bit more on the teacher and just helping, again, how do we make our teachers feel a lot more comfortable, particularly if they're new to teaching online. What can we do to improve the chances of A, feeling comfortable to begin with, and B, building that skill set over time?
Yeah, great. I think one of the things that I liked when we looked at this is, and the reason I started with that kind of random selection of real quite odd things, is the fact that when people are in front of a camera, they change. And there is an element to online teaching where some teachers and some students will behave in a way that they would never behave in a normal face-to-face interaction. And I think that's important, because as a teacher, there is an element to kind of feeling like, I'm the star, I'm in camera. And of course, it's not about us. And students, I think, similarly can, in a positive way, actually often overcome shyness. And as we've said before, that thing of not being surrounded by 15 people staring at you, being in a smaller group, being in an online classroom, I think makes a massive difference to a lot of students. So pros and cons, eh?
I mean, just what you said there was quite fascinating, because even just the way that we start our conversations online, I think we both feel very comfortable talking online. And in fact, I think we've met in person, and I like both. I like both Toms.
Totally agree.
They're great.
Yeah. No, right at you. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have met face to face, probably about as many times as we've met online, as it were. And yet, I don't know whether we've just carried that sort of immediately getting on well into our online interactions, or for myself, I think I really, I enjoy the conversations that we have, and I enjoy the different directions they go in, and that creates its own sort of interaction and rapport.
I wonder if there's some clues here then. Like, firstly, with LearnCube and what we do, like, I definitely believe, from what I've seen, that having a structured piece of material definitely helps in terms of providing some structure. However, just in the initial experience, and again, we've got tools to do this in LearnCube, but just even in this experience, allowing a more kind of just natural, like just seeing each other and not bring up the slides straight away, and not getting so struck into the details of it immediately, I think it should go a long way in just making both sides feel comfortable. And I wonder if that, again, just reflects probably what would happen in a normal physical classroom. In fact, it's way shorter in an online classroom, but in person, you would go into a class, you would start chatting with the person next to you, to each other, maybe look at them slightly awkward as you kind of pull out your pink pencil case and all of those fantastic things. But you would sort of have those kind of bits of natural conversation. I wonder online if that's actually a really, I would suggest that's one really great practice to get into, is how can you create that rapport and that sense of natural conversation at the beginning.
Definitely true, isn't it? Because I think the most successful language classes are those that don't feel like a class. So that thing of kind of, I've often find provoking a conversation or initiating a conversation that I'll then leave, and allowing students to kind of have that conversation using the target language is very powerful. And but it's also an educational thing in general, isn't it? That if you look back on your schooling, or any of us, or any of the viewers at home, when you think about teachers that affected your moments at school, they're often not when somebody was saying, look at page 48. They're often when a teacher was giving a bit of themselves, was maybe telling you things that maybe on one level were not connected, but then really were. And those are the ones you remember years later,
Like the Welsh phrase that we said at the start of this.
I remember a really lovely student of mine called Tolga, who is a Turkish guy, and I taught him years and years ago, and we became friends. And 10 years later, I was in Istanbul and met up, and we had a meal. I was chatting to him, and I said, how's your girlfriend? And he went, no, we broke up. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. She seemed very nice. They were together a couple of years, And he said, well, I remember that thing you said in class once. And I said, oh, what was that, Tolga? And he said, you said to me, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. I was like, no, Tolga, that wasn't me. That was Buddha. And he was like, oh yeah, well, it was in your class. So he kind of attributed this great divine wisdom to me. And obviously it wasn't mine. But my point, I suppose, is just that he, 10 years later, was still using that maxim to guide him through relationships. And you think, oh no. And it was maybe a throwaway thing that I didn't even think about. And I think as a teacher,
I think there's something there. One of the things that I think is quite relevant out of that is that if you can make your teaching feel bigger than just the skill set, like the minutiae of what you're doing, it's more valuable, it's more memorable, and it's more likely that somebody's going to recommend you to somebody else. So I think
there's a level of engagement which is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's that engagement which I think hammers the lessons home. Do you know what I mean? Because the things that you learn them because they're memorable. And there has to be something. For me, linguistically, it is always like a word that sounds like a word, or I remember that because it's this, which makes me think of that. And that association stuff's very powerful for me when I learn languages. And I think we have to be able to create that for students on some level, don't we?
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of best practice, and I think we're almost getting to some of the things that may seem obvious, but actually you might not be thinking about. And one of those that comes to mind is pausing and allowing the space just to be online. Because from what I've seen as well with talking online, teaching online, it's very easy to fill up all the moments because we're so awkward or uncomfortable for some reason teaching online, even if that potentially wasn't your natural personality in an in-person class. But you kind of need to look for those moments of pause and allowing the other person to speak. Otherwise, you're just literally lecturing and no one's really engaged with something. Giving those points of pause, that gives somebody the opportunity to step in.
I think that's a really important point in terms of teaching generally. It's also the power of silence, isn't it, in communication, that we often feel that communication is what we say and how we say it, whereas there's also an extremely powerful communication in what we don't say and how we didn't say it. And I think it's really interesting watching, for example, I do a lot of work with business people about cross-cultural stuff, and that idea of confrontation is really interesting because in Nordic cultures, that often involves not saying anything at all. And in Southern cultures, that often involves screaming and shouting. And it's very interesting to watch those two groups respond to each other and try and decipher that behavior, And online, that's the fascinating thing now, isn't it? The people are able to work globally because they can work online, and yet unpicking those kind of things is really hard. And is it harder doing that via an online portal? I don't know. It's significantly easier than it used to be by letter or by telephone. Do you know what I mean? Because you can actually see the person laugh. But what does a laugh mean in Russia compared to what a laugh means in northern China? So
one thing that I thought was quite interesting in the way that is the theme is we can both see each other.
Yeah.
I think a best practice, in my view, is actually to leave the camera on while you're trying to build rapport. Now, there will be times where turning off the video makes a lot of sense. But if you're in a conversation, not a lecture style, not with lots of students, but if you're with a small number of students, I would highly recommend having video, because it does allow you to clarify whether they got what you said or didn't. I think teachers definitely will feel a lot more comfortable if they can see the other person, because otherwise it's like, not many teachers have taught in an in-person classroom where at the start they just draw the blinds so they can see nobody and then just talk at the curtains and then hope that some sound comes back. Like, that doesn't happen in an in-person class. Yeah. And yet I actually don't think it's good practice for a teacher, certainly not initially, unless that's a deliberate decision for a deliberate outcome, to ask people or to be even allowing people to turn off their video. So I think
I agree entirely, and I think I think that's totally true, and I would agree with that. I think for myself, I think there is value sometimes to turning the video off if people are shy, if people are concerned. But that's also a good reason to keep it on, you know.
But it's
I think
deliberate though. That's my
sure.
point. Is I think that it shouldn't be
For a
deliberately
limited
turned
time.
on.
Yeah.
I think it should be by default videos on, and then as a deliberate decision, you turn it off. And to be fair, a deliberate decision might be, you know, you're in the middle of nowhere on a really poor connection. You're coming in and out in the video. Let's just turn the video off, and you're going to probably have a better experience. And we're not going to be as distracted by the video turning on and off, or you pausing, or whatever.
No, that's absolutely true, isn't it?
Fully deliberate decision, but
yeah, definitely. I think what's interesting as well is the conversations about best practice are very tough, because on one level there's a huge existing body of research and information about online teaching, and yet there's also a huge amount of ignorance, but there's also a huge amount that nobody knows because we haven't done it yet. And also that thing where, are we teaching things that people no longer need, that we're teaching people to communicate in a way that 10, 15 years from now will become totally irrelevant, you know? And that's certainly what we've always done, isn't it? You know, so, you know, at school I remember being taught laboriously about calligraphy and letter writing and how to end a letter, you know, whether it was sincerely or faithfully, and all these things, which of course are of no use whatsoever to me now, and will be of no use to anybody ever again. So you sort of think, oh, actually, when I say to people, look, best practice for online teaching is do this and this and this, you know, actually, you know, A, do I know? And B, why would it work for them? You know, it's really an interesting one, isn't it? Because that is the nature of teaching, is all you can do is teach stuff you know, but the stuff you know may not be what they need to know or how they need to get access to that information. And, you know, you see that a lot now with that stuff about, you know, oh, people don't read books anymore. Why would they read books now? You know, you don't need to read a book. You can watch a 3-minute YouTube video and you know Wuthering Heights. It's fine, you know. And does that have more intrinsic value to read a book than to watch a video about a book?
Yeah. I think the difference here is deliberateness. So if that's true, fine. As long as you've kind of tested both out and have found that one is better than the other. I think it's also like one thing I think you said was really important, to be humble. By the way, I have so little teaching experience, but I have seen and talked to loads of teachers about their teaching. So my knowledge, I'll admit, is massively secondhand. However, one thing I do know, the schools that are working with LearnCube that are doing really well, and the schools that maybe aren't. And, you know, we kind of can see that in, you know, what sort of feedback are students going, like, are they growing as businesses? And the ones that I'm talking to that are growing really well are the ones that have a real deliberateness to them. And they do think about the student experience. They do think about, okay, you know, what should best practice look like in online education? There's very few that are saying the teacher should be lecturing, they should be turning off their video, they should be just passively listening to me in large groups while I talk through the present progressive or whatever it is. So my thoughts on this, while I'm humble on it, I still would like to be going on an experimental kind of journey and a deliberate journey on that, because I think
it's interesting because I value the conversations we have for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because I think you're you know, you are very humble about these things, and you continuously say, oh, I don't know, and actually you know a huge amount, because you are sort of stood on the banks watching the river flow in a way that a lot of us, you know, academicians, teachers, and people involved directly in schools are not, because we're in there swimming along with the current. And actually that's a very powerful position to be in terms of being able to see wider behaviour and being able to have, can I say it? I'm going to say it, being able to have vision, you know. And that's why you're CEO of LearnCube, you know what I mean? it's because
I feel very unhumble now, but one thing I think is true, which is the student aspect. I can probably relate a lot more to being a student and listening in and seeing how a teacher teaches. And I think one thing that enables me to do is go, hey, if I was a student here, would I be that stoked about the way that this teacher is teaching me? So I do feel like there's some value in that. But let's go back again to this idea of providing some, okay, if we don't call them best practices, because these are all
you're right. There are best practices.
to be,
Yeah, but
but I think that's a nice I think it's a nice spin on it. Let's assume that these are practices that you should test. We've kind of gone through starting the conversation as a conversation rather than immediately launching into, I'm the teacher, you're the student, deal with it, here's my presentation. I think experiment with both. Maybe it works for some cultures, for some people, for some groups, but I would again look at that and do enough on both and then see which one works out for you. With video, do people actually find it way better and they learn better? And you can see the outcomes of them learning better by them turning off their video compared to turning on. Try it. If you don't agree with us, that's brilliant. That means you've done your own work. I mean, what would be some of the other areas that would be just super important that are, again, I think
one of the big things for me is, and it sounds very basic, but it's punctuality. And I think that thing of, and I'd apologize because I'm not very good at it, but that thing of being in the online room and ready before your students arrive, which I would always do in a physical classroom.
I was just thinking that preparation, right? Like such a basic.
Yeah. And dressing for it. You know what I mean? Like I will always put a shiny watch on when I'm working online because it makes me feel more like I'm actually, and I've got my shirt on, you know what I mean? And what I'll often do is before I'm doing a webinar, before I'm doing training, or often before just a meeting, I will pop a shirt on, or at the beginning of the working day, I'll pop a shirt on, I'll put a shiny watch on, and it makes me feel like I'm proper and I'm working,
Yeah.
And I think that's key. I think that's nice, and there is a tendency when working from home to feel that you're at home, whereas of course you're at work. So, that's a stark difference. And I suppose also the thing for teachers is the thing I think which is always easy to forget is that if you are bored by materials, then your students will be bored by the materials.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, your students will probably also be bored. But at least you're interested. Do you know what I mean? They're never going to be interested if you're not.
Yeah, there's a you can't lose kind of scenario there, right? Like if you're interested, you're only going to be able to get the best out of the situation. And vice versa. If you're not interested, you're only going to be exposing yourself to the worst potential outcome. I would like to go back on that idea of punctuality and preparation. In a physical classroom, I'm almost sure that people don't just rush in a couple of minutes late from class to class. And if they do, like they generally find the classroom in bits with like darts going across the room, people all over the show. But part of being there punctually is you're setting the tone of what the class is going to be like, right? So if you don't turn up there before the student does, then you've allowed the students and their energy to dictate the class, which you have no control over. Whereas if you turn up, ideally sort of 5 minutes before, not so long, to be fair, in an online context, turning up, if everyone turns up super early, then you can kind of almost create a little bit of like an awkward, like, man, is this ever going to end? But the 5 minutes is great because it gives you enough time to do your prep. If you're using a system like LearnCube, you've got a bit more control over who's in, turning off videos if you need to, and avoid the kind of awkward pause at the beginning, or using that 5 minutes ideally to create that rapport, and which you're going to be, we talked about this before, Tom, but this idea of like fuel for the classroom ahead is like that rapport is like a bit of that fuel. It'll kind of get you over a couple of the bumpy bits in the class. But you're prepared, and then when you turn up, or at least when the students turn up, you're the one in charge, not the other way around. If you've got if you know what materials you're going through or what's going on, you might even be in LearnCube, you might be even loading the past class, getting everything sorted. Like you're going to look like you're in control, and if you look like you're in control, probably are.
What I'm going to do is a thing that I always do, which I find magical. And he's there. He's gone. No, he's there. Right,
he's gone.
Thank you. No, he's there. Look at that. You see what I've done?
Deliberate?
I've turned the camera off. No, that was just me being stupid, which is sadly a problem for many of my activities. The thing I'm going to do now is just a very quick thing, and I would like to apologise to start, but you're not going to see me for about, I would say, 11 seconds. So during those 11 seconds, if you'd like to just, I don't know, do a little dance or something, whatever.
I'll just fill in the time awkwardly as Thom goes away. 11 seconds will pass. But actually, I'm going to enjoy the pause. And I will look through Thom's amazing garage right here. Oh, there we are.
My point there is music, right? So what I'll often do before the group arrive is I am there early, right? And I do this when I'm training teachers, when I'm training business people, when I'm teaching students. I'm there early, and when they arrive, the first thing they hear is music. So it's not me greeting them, it's not me talking to them. They hear music playing, right? And obviously it's my choice of music as well, which is nice for me because I like music. So it means I'm in a good mood when I start.
Only Phil Collins, I thought.
The musical antichrist. Don't get me started. But like, it's an interesting one because, you know, it avoids that kind of 5 minutes of going, hello, hi, lovely, how are you? Great, lovely. You know, there's none of that. There's just music playing. And I've often got the video on and I'm kind of doing stuff and I'm sorting my desk out and I'm putting things around. And they can see me, but we don't have to interact, which is quite relaxing for them. So they kind of come in and they're like, oh, okay, oh, nice. Yeah. And then I can turn it off and people know that we've started.
I think that's absolute gold. Like, that's one of those things that it seems like it's like, oh, that's pretty obvious. But actually, that makes total sense to me. Like, why was it that even in those 11 seconds, I sort of felt like I needed to fill a piece of that void? Whereas if you have music, like, people just sit there, just not looking at each other, not talking at each other for hours, as long as there's something playing. I like that. I really like that. I think that could. It
makes it a place you want to be. You know,
it does, right? And you're setting the vibe of you're kind of. If there are cultures that find awkward silence awkward, then you're filling that space. You might want to think about your music choice, but you might not want to. I mean, part of it might be like, that's what's unique about me. I always play Metallica before every single class, and that's fine. And then you'll have other people that just want to play pop, and that's fine. But I would suggest probably err on the side of making sure that it's not like terrible waiting music, whether it's too extreme on one end or the other. But I think that's a really solid point there, Thom. And I think it really would add professionalism and to the experience. I think this is something we've talked about a lot, this idea of the user student experience.
Right. It's really magical, and I think it makes a real big difference. And I often do it at the end as well, and I'll often do it when I've asked the group to do an activity. So I've said to students, right, you know, working in groups, you're doing this and this and this, and then I'll carry on doing it. And what I don't do, and what I have tried to do in the past and failed miserably, was to try and do it through either my own streaming services or on my computer, right? And that I found really overcomplicated and didn't really work in terms of picking up sounds that I then wanted to interject with. So what I do is play it on a separate device, which I then, you know, turn on and off, and I find that works as well, you know. And also what's interesting with that is that because nobody knows what the music is, because it's not on their screen saying this is this track playing by this person, they will often say to me, oh, what music is that?
Nice.
They'll never say, I really like it, I will download that, it sounds amazing, ever. They'll just say, I'll make sure that's not on my Spotify list.
Exactly. One thing that is useful is that in LearnCube, you can just use YouTube. So you could just have that link. One of the nice things about that is it's saved into your library, so you can always just access it. So even when you first get into a class, you don't really know what's going on. That first whiteboard can just be embed that YouTube song and then go from there. I still like the idea of having your own separate device. I think that can work. Just depends.
I think that's a much better idea, to be honest.
But I think
what he said.
Let's again assume that we don't know what best practice is, and instead we should leave it to you to figure out what your best practice is. But I think that's a cracker idea. I actually think we've left with some really good ones. So for me, the music one was my favorite. I definitely recommend that, and I think that makes a huge amount of sense. We've talked about video on or off. Experiment if you want to try it, but I think what we have also talked about is punctuality, preparation, but also professionalism.
And professionalism. Oh, look, we did it together. We're so in sync. This is amazing.
So good.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But that professionalism comes from those two things, but it's about you being in control, setting the scene. And when I say control, we're really talking about making sure that, the teacher is in a position of authority, but that the student's going to have a great time and they're going to learn something. Sounds brilliant.
Definitely. Brilliant. Wicked. And with some lovely tunes, which is always key.
I think we should end with music.
Definitely, I'm with you. Right, you're on. Now this is, it comes in a bit, but brilliant.
I have to go a little slow. I'm not going to be dancing just yet. I don't feel like we're at that stage of our relationship yet, Tom.
It's difficult. It's difficult.
We'll get there.
I'm at dancing almost instantly with everybody, but
Yeah. Hey, good seeing you.
Brilliant.
And look, we'll see you again next time.
Excellent. Love it. Cheers.